So today we're going to learn how to use our watercolor sets. The watercolor set is on the art materials supply list that's on Google Classroom. So hopefully you've got one. If you don't have one, at the end of this video, there's a technique for creating a watercolor effect using another material. So even if you don't have watercolor, you can paint like a watercolor artist. So I need my watercolor pan. I need a cup for water with just a little water in it. You don't need a lot, and a paintbrush. Let's get started. Okay, let's practice using our watercolor paints. First, we're gonna dip our brush into the water cup, and we are going to put it into one of our colors to wake it up. I'm gonna start with a little bit of red because I'm thinking about making an autumn type scene. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see that I'm only going back and forth with my paintbrush. I'm never mushing it around like this because it really hurts the bristles. That's the hairy part of the brush. It really hurts them to do that. So with our watercolor, we just want to go back and forth when we're waking it up, waking it up, waking it up. Now, I'm gonna start painting my first tree here. Now, I have this idea in my head of what I want to paint, but you can always just experiment with lines and shapes and colors when you're getting to know your watercolor paints. That's fine too. But I love making art for the season, so I'm gonna make a nice fall picture with some warm colors, reds, yellows, oranges. So I have to go back to my water every now and then to keep making more paint. The wetter your watercolor gets, so that means the more water you add, the lighter your color is going to be. So watch when I don't add water this time. Let's see how it's already a little bit darker, and if I keep going without adding water, it's going to be pretty dark. Now, you can let your watercolor dry a little bit and then add more and more layers on top. You can add more different colors on top. You could even do this right now. So let's try. I'm going to finish up with my red. And now I'm going to make sure when I switch colors, I want to go to orange now, or maybe I'll go right to yellow. I always wash my brush. So I'm going to wash it in between. I'm going to bounce, 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 bounce in that water. And now I'm going to wake it up, 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 wake it up. Let's see that yellow. Ooh. Oh, I already lost that paint, so I have to get more water, bounce, 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 and wake it up, wake it up, wake it up, wake it up, wake it up. Now I'm switching colors again, so I'm gonna bounce, 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 and I'm gonna go right to black. These watercolors don't have any brown, so that's a little tricky. You can try making your own brown by mixing some of the colors together, maybe do a little bit of experimenting, but I'm just gonna go right for the black, and I'm gonna make the tree trunk and maybe some branches going into the tree. Now, when you paint wet paint on wet, it's going to start bleeding a little, and that means the colors are kind of mushing into each other. So see how this is getting a little mushy looking? That's okay. Sometimes it looks a little spooky and cool, but if you don't like that, you're gonna have to let your paper dry a little bit in between colors. So you might have to be a little bit patient. Every time I switch colors, I wash my brush. Never dig into your watercolors. You have to be gentle with them. Okay, I'm gonna wash my brush, bounce, bounce, bounce. Go to my green, wake it up, wake it up, wake it up, wake it up. Try to use some different kinds of marks when you're doing watercolor, because just one kind of brush stroke is a little simple. You could make other kinds of dots, or you could make some kinds of long lines. I'm gonna take a little bit of blue, and I'm gonna make some little marks in my hills. Some different kinds of brush strokes. So here's a fun thing that you can try. If you get nice clean water, you can try some wet on wet painting. So I'm gonna paint a big part of my paper. If you do this too slow, your paper will dry and this won't work. So maybe even just do a little bit at a time. Then take your color and just kind of paint, and the color will start to spread and bleed. Just try not to add too much water because your paper will get weak and it might rip. Maybe this picture is at sunset. All right, so have fun experimenting with your watercolors. So I've got some Crayola markers. You want markers that are water-based. Don't use permanent markers for this because the goal is to get these colors to bleed. We want them to kind of mush away. So I'm gonna do kind of a tie-dye pattern. I'm gonna see what happens when I paint over this with my water. Kind of makes it into watercolors. If you don't have watercolors at home yet, you could always try this technique. It ends up being a little bit like watercolor, where getting the marker wet kind of wakes it up and makes it into paint. So this is a fun technique if you don't have access to a watercolor set.